All right, everybody, welcome to our first set of notes for Chapter 13, the expanding or the impending crisis, or as I call it here, Manifest Destiny in the Road to the Civil War. I'm going to keep each of these videos hopefully no more than about 25 or 30 minutes, somewhere in that time range, so we keep your attention for the period of class. Now remember a couple things. Number one, your first DBQ will be on Monday, next Monday, and you'll get your documents before then. I'll go over that later on in the videos this week. I also want to encourage you maybe to kind of help you along as we go along through the notes here. I want you to go back and grab a textbook from the table in the back of the room there and kind of maybe follow along as we go through the text. So go ahead and do that now. I'll give you a few seconds to do that. If we need to pause anything, just go ahead and ask Dr. Quinn or Miss Petters if you're there first period to just pause the video, and we'll just then pick up once everybody's caught up. But we're going to go ahead and jump right into the basic ideas here of Chapter 13. And this is all the same stuff I'd be talking about in class if I were there. So it's as if I'm teaching, even though I'm not there teaching. So taking a look at this image. Again, this kind of goes back to some of the images we looked at from Chapter 12 and the general idea of manifest destiny. In that image, you see, a lot of settlers on the journey westward along the Oregon Trail or whatever trail, with the angel or the goddess of the West leading them forward. And this plays into completely the whole concept of manifest destiny. This idea, manifest destiny, that it is God's desire, it is God's intent for America to expand her borders all the way from coast to coast, from Atlantic to Pacific, from east to west. Manifest destiny, the idea that it was God's intent for America to expand her borders all the way from the east all the way to the west. And this goes along with some of the other earlier ideas we talked about, the whole concept of the shining city upon a hill from John Winthrop, that, America is destined for something greater, and we're going to be an example for the rest of the world to follow. And this is really genuinely the way that this is the way that God sees it, and God wants to see America succeed and expand because we're his chosen people. So manifest destiny becomes a very dominant idea that is really going to drive a lot of the stuff you're going to see happen in this chapter over the next couple days, particularly the things we're going to talk about here today. So, what is the main idea that we're talking about here in chapter? Was the main idea we're talking about here in chapter 13? Okay, so again, I'm giving you kind of like a general thesis of the chapter, right? Because the DBQ you're going to be doing on Monday is going to kind of go along with this concept of manifest destiny. I'll tell you right now, the topic of your DBQ will be about territorial expansion, as is going to be covered largely in this particular chapter. So, pay close attention to those ideas. But anyway, right? So another less defensible result of the Second Great Awakening was the concept of manifest destiny. The idea that God had ordained white Americans to conquer and settle the continent from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Now, to us today, to the 21st century mind, where we don't necessarily think of things, obviously in the same way that we did, 200 years ago, this was a very popular idea, and it had a lot of support, enough support to elect a relatively unknown guy by the name of James Knox Polk to the presidency, because in 1844 he simply runs on a campaign of manifest destiny and expanding America's borders, et cetera, et cetera. So he does this through land agreements and land purchases and winning a fairly significant war with Mexico. More on that shortly. In a lot of ways, the Mexican War sets America on the road to the Civil War. As you can imagine, even before the Mexican War is over, North and South people are arguing and fighting, trying to determine what's going to be the deal with slavery in these new acquired territories after the war. But that's not the only reason the Mexican War sets us on a path to the Civil War. The Mexican War is the pre-season for the Civil War. It's the practice grounds for the Civil War. The soldiers that fight in the Mexican War as infantrymen in some cases, or even lower ranking officers, are going to be your big names and your generals and the people that come to fame during the Civil War. You're talking about the Robert E. Lees and the Ulysses S. Grants and the James Longstreets and Stonewall Jacksons. If you're a Civil War fan, you'll know those names. They all fought in the Mexican War, and they learned about war from having fought in the Mexican War. So when the Civil War comes, about 12, 13 years after the Mexican War, these guys are hardened, they're experienced, and they're ready to wage a campaign and a war that's going to be, a very challenging one for America on all fronts. So something to think about as we talk about the Mexican War today, which we'll get into more here in a second. So let's talk a little bit about the election of 1844. And you'll note as I put the notes up here, I'm trying to kind of give you more of the notes than I typically do in class, so you have it all written down for you in case you can't quite hear what I'm saying or you're falling behind or anything like that. So I'm trying to spell things out for you a little more clearly. Anyway, so in 1844, our old friend Henry Clay makes another run at the presidency. Finally, this time, most people expect him to win. He had previously run in 1824, and that resulted in the corrupt bargain, where John Quincy Adams ultimately won the presidency that year. And then in 1832, he ran again, but lost to Andrew Jackson. So 12 years later, 1844, Henry Clay's back again, running for the presidency one more time. And this time, people expect him to win. The current president at the time, John Tyler, was not particularly popular. Although people thought it would be cool that, 180 years from then, he would actually still have living grandchildren, which we talked about. That's weird. But the thing about Henry Clay is, as a Northern Whig, as most Whigs are, he's very apprehensive about manifest destiny. Why apprehensive about manifest destiny? Because he's concerned, as are many other Northerners, that expanding lands and expanding too quickly is going to reopen the wound of slavery, or reopen the controversy over slavery and create bigger, more challenging issues. So the Whigs, generally being from the North, are not big supporters of this idea of manifest destiny because they know the controversy and challenge that creates. So Clay is just kind of along party lines with the other Whigs. Even though he's not a Northerner himself, obviously he's from Kentucky, he is a Whig, and the Whigs tend to come from the North. Anyway, the Democrats nominate James Knox Polk, who nobody really knew that much about. he had been Speaker of the House for a couple terms, but he also comes from Tennessee. And being from Tennessee, and also having Andrew Jackson being from Tennessee, he gains popularity in that sense, okay? Because people still kind of love Andrew Jackson. The common man in particular still loves Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson got away scot-free from the Panic of 1837 because he was out of the presidency before things got really bad. So Andrew Jackson's still pretty popular, although he will be dead pretty soon. He does die in like 1845, but whatever. And James Knox Polk likes what the people like, and at the time, a lot of people like Manifest Destiny. So, since the people like Manifest Destiny and James Knox Polk likes Manifest Destiny, this makes him more appealing. Now, what exactly does Manifest Destiny include? Number one, they want to admit Texas to the Union. What's been going on in Texas? Well, let me give you a quick rundown on Texas. Texas got their independence from Mexico in the 1820s and tried to get into the United States, but we weren't ready to. They kind of got denied because Andrew Jackson, of all people, when he became president in the early 30s, when Texas applied to join the United States, Andrew Jackson said, oh, it's in the South, and again, this is going to create controversy over slavery. So he actually denied them the right to join the statehood. So Texas had been existing since like 1822 as a republic, as the Republic of Texas, kind of their own country. Mexico, who kind of had claimed rights over Texas, kind of created their own problem because when Texas was ceded to Mexico in 1822, Texas or Mexicans invited Americans to move into Texas and try to settle, and settle in Texas. And pretty soon there were more whites and Americans in Texas than there were Mexicans. So this created tension between Mexico and the Americans living in Texas, and this led to the Texas Revolution in 1836, where Texas ultimately won its independence from Mexico and declared itself its own republic. This was when the famous Battle of the Alamo happened, and everybody, all 283 Americans fighting there were killed, including famous Americans like Davy Crockett and Jim Bowie. If you've ever heard of a Bowie knife, that is who. Probably not, unless you're a hunter. But that is who a Bowie knife is named after, this guy. But they were all killed fighting at the Alamo. All 280 or 282 Americans. And shortly after that, General Sam Houston, who would get a city named after him, not San Antonio, but Houston, would end up defeating the George Washington of Mexico, General Santa Anna, and their Texas would get its independence. So fast forward to the early 1840s, as more and more white Americans are moving into Texas, the desire and the push for them to be admitted to the United States continues to grow. So that's what's been going on in Texas. There's also a dispute going on in the Pacific Northwest over the Oregon Territory, with Great Britain. Britain is claiming it. We're claiming parts of it, and there's a dispute over what actually the border is. We think it should be at the 54th parallel. The British think it should be somewhere a little bit south of that, further south of the 54th parallel. So going back and forth between the two sides, things seem like they might be heading for, potentially an armed conflict. But, Britain is 0-2 in armed conflicts against us, and they're kind of over it all. So ultimately, we're going to be able to acquire the Oregon Territory with the agreement that isn't actually at the 54th parallel, but ultimately agreed to at the 49th parallel. And that makes our current northern border with Canada. So the northern border of Washington State is about the 49th parallel, and that is the territory that we acquire from Britain in the agreement with the United States, between the United States and Britain, to acquire the Oregon Territory. And then finally, the other area we really want is California. Now, California at this time and all of the American Southwest belongs to Mexico. Okay, so I'm going to actually go a step further and show you this map. So all this, right, in 1844, this is America, and all this stuff here, I know we can't see the whole nation, but all of that belongs to Mexico and South. So Mexico is actually a fairly large country. But with more and more Americans moving west and us wanting more access to that Pacific coast, there begins to become, again, a manifest destiny inspired push to acquire more lands along the Pacific coast so we can truly have a nation that stretches from the Atlantic to the Pacific and not have anybody else in there kind of fighting with us over, control of that Pacific coast. So there's the big push for that, and we want to gain that territory from Mexico because it belongs to Mexico at this time. It's not like Texas, where Texas kind of belongs to, Texas, but Mexico thinks it's theirs, but Texas thinks it belongs to them. This is land that is part of Mexico. You're talking about California, Nevada, Colorado, Oklahoma, Arizona, New Mexico, California. That is all part of Mexico. On a map of the world at the point, that would say Mexico. Okay, so this is ultimately what's going to lead us to a war and conflict with Mexico here. Anyway, if you look at the vote in 1844, it is relatively close in terms of the popular vote percentage, but James Knox Polk in the blue wins all the southern states and then several of the northern states as well in his push for manifest destiny. So you can kind of see there, it's not just a southern thing. There's people in other parts of the country too that support the concept of manifest destiny. I think that is I could be wrong. I think I am wrong, but I don't know. But just kind of just popped up when this background there when when I was making the slideshow here, and that might be the Texas State Building, but it might not. But anyway, it looked cool, so I just put it on the back there. Anyway, so fortunately for James Knox Polk, his realization of manifest destiny starts to come really fast. On his very first day as president, Texas is admitted to the Union, not because of anything Polk did, but actually on his way out, John Tyler basically signed off on and allowed Texas to join the United States and become part of the Union. So Polk has these three goals, wants to gain these three territories, and already right out of the gate, he's got Texas joining the Union. Now, this creates a problem, like it says there. On Polk's first day in office, Texas is admitted to the Union. Now, since Mexico never truly recognized Texas independence, it seems to Mexico now that we have basically just stolen a big part of Mexico. Now Texas saw itself as a republic. The United States recognized it, countries in Europe recognized it as its own republic, but Mexico never did. So Mexico is like, wait a minute, you just took lands from us. Ay caramba, that's terrible. So we're going to have, right out of the gate here, some contention and some issues between the United States and Mexico growing, just over Texas wanting to join the United States. Now, big problem number two. Our second issue is Polk claims that the Rio Grande is the southern border of Texas. Mexico claims that it is the further north Nueces River. Okay, so we're talking about what amounts to probably like a little less than the bottom quarter of what is present-day Texas. What is the current southern border of Texas? What river? Is it the Nueces or the Rio Grande? Who wants to answer that question? Right, very good. It is the Rio Grande River. So, spoiler alert, we win. But anyway, so it's a large amount of land and a large amount of territory. So we've got some issues over borders, and issues over borders often lead to conflict. Now, Polk, as we mentioned before, also wants to gain California. So he offers Mexico, basically, name your price, we'll buy California off you. Mexico is insulted, on top of already being very angry at the United States because we, quote unquote, stole Texas from them. So this is going to make that anger worse. Why would they be insulted that we offered to buy California from them? Well, now looking at it today, America obviously is a much stronger, more powerful, more economically and politically and socially sound country than Mexico is. But it wasn't so clear back in 1846. Like I told you before, Mexico was big. The entire bottom third of the continental United States belonged to Mexico. So Mexico was a big, powerful country and wasn't someone to be kind of trifled with. And Mexico was like, oh, you think you can just buy this from us? Like we're just going to roll over and say whatever you want, United States. So this creates the tension, or this builds up the tension that already existed between the two sides and makes things even a little bit worse. Now, ultimately in this situation, Polk decides, well, the only thing we can do, because we have this disputed territory regarding this river, is war. So he sends one of our best generals at the time, old rough and ready, General Zachary Taylor, to this disputed territory between the Nueces and the Rio Grande. And they just go there and they wait for Mexico to do something stupid, right? So this was a very organized and planned out situation, right? Polk knows Mexico's going to respond in an angry way. He has an army at the ready to go there and wait for Mexico to do that stupid thing. And ultimately, what do you think that stupid thing does Polk expect the Mexicans to do? That's right. Good. He expects Mexico to invade into that disputed territory, which they do, giving us the recourse to respond with, military, with military action, and ultimately puts us on the defensive in a war to make it seem, even though at the end of the day, probably not so much, make it seem that Mexico provoked us into this war. Because usually in America, as we even today and way back then, right, wars that involve the United States, right, have a lot more support when America is acting in defense of itself rather than acting as the aggressor. And Polk knows, as do other manifest destiny and war supporting American politicians know, that for this war to be supported and successful, we got to make sure that the Mexicans provoke us. So let's talk about the Mexican War here real quick. Now, you could say James Knox Polk at the end of the day is a little bit sus in baiting Mexico into attacking us, which is exactly what he did. But Mexico, at the end of the day, pretty stupid for taking the bait in this case. Probably could have been resolved diplomatically, but Mexico was angry. The United States was looking for new land. Texas wanted to be part of the United States. And as you can imagine, war is what results. Now, we are ready for this war, like very ready for this war, okay? We had our army all in the places they needed to be, waiting on that moment where, you know, we get the go-ahead, so to speak, or we get the, all right, it's on like Donkey Kong now, right? So we had our whole Navy waiting off the coast of California, ready to invade coastal cities in California. Now remember again, California is part of Mexico. So at this time, invading California is the same thing as invading Mexico. So we invade into, you know, like San Francisco and San Diego, San Bernardino, San Jose, places like that. You know, big cities along the coast of California, and quickly occupy them. Phase one, boom, America takes land for itself, or at least occupies land. Now, our army was waiting at Fort Leavenworth, which was in Kansas, waiting, you know, for the moment where we got, again, the go-ahead to say, okay, now go from Kansas, which was like the western edge in that area of like our Louisiana Purchase lands at that time. So we just invaded into Mexico, which of course is present day like Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico, Arizona, places like that, and occupied Mexican cities in those regions. You know, so we were sitting at the ready, waiting for the moment to attack, right? Taylor, as expected, when the Mexicans invade into that disputed territory between the Rio Grande and Nueces rivers, easily wins, easily beats Mexico. And we have another general, probably our greatest general at that time in America, General Winfield Scott, Old Fuss and Feathers, they called him. We had Old Rough and Ready and Zachary Taylor, and Old Fuss and Feathers and Winfield Scott. He goes on and invades into Mexico through Veracruz. So you're talking about kind of going in basically like around the area where like Cancun and the Yucatan Peninsula are today, if you've ever been down in Mexico. We go in there, march our way up to Mexico City, win a great battle at the Battle of Chapultepec. I only tell you that because I like to say Chapultepec, and get a pretty easy victory and a relatively quick surrender from Mexico. Big win, relatively easy win. You know, we lost like less than 2,500 soldiers, I think, in the entire campaign. Casualties weren't super high in the Mexican War, but as a whole, this was a well organized and well carried out military effort by the United States. Now, to end the war, the official ending of the war was the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848. Why is that important? Because that was the treaty that recognized Texas as an independent nation and as part of the United States from the Mexican perspective, and it ceded to the United States it's ceded to the United States, basically all of that land in the southern, in the southwest United States. So as of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, again, 1848, the present day continental United States, lower 48 states, are finished. There would be another little piece of land that we would get later on called the Gadsden Purchase, but I'll talk about that some other time. I want to finish this up here pretty quick. So the Wilmot Proviso, kind of one of the last things to talk about here. Again, why do I talk about something like this Wilmot Proviso? I want to give you kind of the counter idea to the concept of manifest destiny, in the sense that we're seeing tensions rise immediately after this war is over. So David Wilmot was a congressman from Massachusetts, and he came out with a bill. A proviso is another name for a bill. It's like an addendum or an addition to a bill that said that any land that we acquired from Mexico should be free territory. Yeah, I'm writing on this thing, and it's terrible. So obviously, there's going to be a very different opinion in the South, because we're still operating at this time under the old Missouri Compromise line that we had, that we learned about way back in Chapter 8. Okay, and a lot of this new land we acquired is below that Missouri Compromise line. That's going to create big problems later on. But Wilmot comes up with this idea, that all the new land that we acquire from Mexico has to be free. Now, as you can imagine, the South gets really, really upset at this. We haven't even finished the war, and people are already fighting over, what's going to be the status of slavery and how is this peace treaty going to work at the end of the conflict. So, the Wilmot Proviso never becomes a law. It never passes. Write that down. Wilmot Proviso never passes. Okay. So why do we talk about it? Because it's one of those things that shows you the difference between North and South and the tensions growing between the two sides. The North is upset, or the North is upset or concerned about the possibility of slavery entering into new territory. The South is upset that the North is trying to make all the decisions for the future of this new territory right after it's been made. Okay, so the war's just barely ending, and they're already fighting over what's going to happen at the end. So real quick, look at the map here. This is kind of the lower 48 states being kind of worked out. We've added all of this from Mexico. We purchased all of this from Oregon, or from the British. And then, Texas joins the United States as well. Like I said, there's this little Gadsden area. We'll talk about that sometime in the future. So anyway, that is it. I know I went a bit over what I wanted to do, but hopefully that means the next couple will be a little bit shorter, but probably not.